investigation into the Stardust tragedy of 1981. Deputy Broughan, you have 4 minutes to make an initial statement.
Thanks, Catherine, and I'd like to initially thank Minister Lynch for attending today and for Minister Shatter for contacting us and giving us apologies. The Minister may recall that it's almost exactly a year ago today that I raised the same issue with her on the approach to the 32nd anniversary of the tragedy. It's now the 33rd anniversary, and I think the same unease and the same grief remains that this important legacy issue hasn't been dealt with, Minister, and in particular the Stardust Relatives and Victims Committee campaign, I think, is clearly showing the need for a commission of investigation into this tragedy under the 2004 legislation, and that's the fundamental call I want to make today, that we do finally have this investigation. On hundreds of occasions in my time here as public representative, Catherine, I've highlighted the concerns of the Stardust families that the cause of the fire wasn't adequately or correctly investigated by the Justice Keen's Tribunal or subsequently, and more recently, of course, I've continually raised the matter with An Taoiseach and with the Taoiseach. Families of those who died or were injured are rightly dissatisfied, I think, with the Keane report of 1982 and the subsequent report of Paul Coffey in 2009. As the Minister may be aware, there is now a Garda investigation into alleged perjured evidence presented to the Keane Tribunal in 1981. And over recent years, there has been a number of instances of new evidence emerging about the tragedy. The families have in their possession research, for example, which points to inconsistencies between an earlier version of the Coffey report from 2008 and the final published report by Paul Coffey Senior Counsel in 2009. They also noted that a Garda letter sent to Paul Coffey in 2008 concerning the map of the Stardust presented to the Keane Tribunal was not furnished to the families. They also have new evidence, which I understand they'll be publishing on the 33rd anniversary this Friday. Based on research carried out by independent researcher Ms Geraldine Foy and the leading fire expert in these islands, Mr Robin Knox, it seems clear that the fire started in the roof space of the Stardust nightclub, where cleansing and other flammable materials were stored. The timeline of the first external witnesses to the fire, as outlined by Ms Foy at a recent press conference in the Skyline Hotel, strongly supports this conclusion. The implications of that research are profound for finally establishing accountability for this terrible tragedy and for vindicating the memories of the young people who died, and to bring closure to the great suffering of their relatives down through the decades. Recently, the release of the 1983 State Papers has also underlined the need for a new, fresh inquiry. It was reported on the release of those papers, for example, that a confidential government memo cautioned against fully implementing all of the recommendations of the Keane Tribunal because the potential it could leave the state open to civil liability claims for similar future accidents. So it seems clear the government of the day, at that time, where the Haughey government and subsequent governments were not overtly concerned about getting to the root of this matter. Early this year, I highlighted evidence also obtained by Ms Foy, an independent researcher, through an FOI request, which shows that crucial aspects of the earlier unpublished draft of the Coffey report were not included in the final published version. Among the other things Paul Coffey stated in that draft, and I quote, "I further accept that a new inquiry is necessary if it is the only way of placing on the public record a finding that's based on evidence." So, end of quote. Basically, the missing excerpt of the report related to the lack of an established cause of the fire based on evidence having been erroneously arrived at by the earlier Keane report. In conclusion, Minister, members of the Stardust Relatives and Victims Committee, they've argued continuously that there were 7 significant alterations of the Coffey report between it being in draft form and the later published version. They now are very anxious that a short, sharp commission investigation will be finally held into this tragedy. And as I said to you last year, I think you were associated yourself with addressing one or two of the most critical legacy issues in our country and finally getting resolution for the victims and relatives. So I'd hope that you'd urge the current Minister to do the same. Thanks, Catherine.
Thank you, Deputy Broughan. Minister to make a statement.
Once again, thank the Deputy for raising this issue. I know we're coming up to an anniversary and it can never be easy for people in terms of losing such young, vibrant people, and an anniversary on such a poignant day every year as a reminder. I'm taking the topical issue on behalf of the Minister for Justice. He does apologise. He has to be somewhere else, but nevertheless I do commit to bring back to the Minister the remarks made by Deputy Broughan, now I know has been a very active campaigner on behalf of this particular committee. As the Minister has previously emphasised, irrespective of any difference of opinion, no one disputes the magnitude of the tragedy or the impact it had on the families concerned and on their wider community. We are all conscious that this Friday is the anniversary of the fire and that all of our thoughts and sympathies are with those affected by the tragedy. The Deputy is of course familiar with the background to the concerns relating to the cause of the Stardust fire, and the Minister has responded previously to queries he has raised on behalf of members of the Victims Committee, so I will not revisit the full history of the case on the Minister's behalf. At essence is the Committee's long-running campaign for a new inquiry into the cause of the fire. As the Deputy is well aware, this led to a detailed submission being made several years ago, setting out the case for a new inquiry, criticising the original tribunal and setting out an alternative hypothesis as to the cause of the fire. The professional advice to the Government at the time was that the argument being presented did not amount to new evidence, but the Committee rejected this assessment. It was precisely in response to this situation, and with a desire to resolve this question definitively and impartially, that an independent examination was put in place. Mr. Paul Coffey, SC, was appointed to carry out this exercise, to provide for an entirely objective and professional assessment of the Committee's call for a new inquiry, and his appointment and terms of reference were agreed with the Committee and their legal representatives. The Victims Committee were provided with considerable financial assistance to make their case and had a full legal team to present that case over 3 days of hearings. The outcome of that process was a very significant one, in that it led to resolutions in both houses clarifying that no one present on the night can be held responsible. A key concern on the part of many and a central component of the Committee's criticism of the original tribunal. Mr. Coffey further concluded, however, that in the absence of any identified evidence as to the cause of the fire, the most another inquiry could achieve would be another set of hypothetical findings which could not be in the public interest. As the Deputy is aware, these findings were endorsed by motions in both houses of the Oireachtas and were widely welcomed at the time. Since then, however, members of the Committee have continued to contend that their theory as to the cause of the fire is in fact what transpired. Nothing the Minister has seen, however, would warrant a departure from Mr. Coffey's findings. Issues have been raised by members of the Committee about the Coffey process, and on the basis that these themselves justified a further inquiry. There has been an entirely unfounded suggestion that attempts were made to influence his drafting or conclusions. The Minister has previously made it clear, for the avoidance of doubt, that no such influence was brought to bear. Unwarranted significance has been attributed to changes between a draft report and a final report. Extracts have been cited out of context and without regard to Mr. Coffey's actual recommendations, which were materially unchanged. Of course, the nature of draft reports is that they do change, and the Government of the day clearly had to rely on the final report submitted by Mr. Coffey. Mr. Coffey's conclusions and advice were entirely independent and, as I said, were widely welcomed upon publication. The Minister is also aware that allegations have been made to the Gardaí concerning evidence presented to the original tribunal. The Deputy will appreciate that these are a matter for the Gardaí to examine in the normal way, and it would not be appropriate for the Minister to comment on that process. Clearly, members of the Victims Committee do not accept the outcome of the independent process which was put in place to enable them to present their case for new inquiry. The persons in question have made it very clear that they will continue to campaign for a new inquiry. The Minister sympathises greatly with them, but having regard to the outcome of that independent examination and in the absence of new evidence concerning the actual cause of the fire, he does not see that it is open to him to disregard the advice which emerged from the process and which was endorsed by both houses of the Oireachtas. The Minister has also indicated that he will of course arrange for the examination as appropriate of a further submission on behalf of the Committee, but in saying this, would again caution against raising unrealistic expectations about what can be achieved or appearing to suggest that the outcome of the Coffey examination can be set aside simply on the basis that his conclusions are not accepted by some. It is right, of course, that concerns about this dreadful tragic event should be raised in the House, and on behalf of the Minister I again thank the Deputy for his continuing support of this particular committee, and I commit, Deputy, to ensuring that the Minister will in fact hear your your statements today.
Thank you, Minister. Deputy Broughan, you have 2 minutes for a supplementary statement.
And thanks again, Cathaoirleach, and thanks, Minister. The Minister, in fact, has said on a number of occasions that in replies to parliamentary questions and in response to the debates over the last year or two on this issue, that he has examined all, if you like, new evidence presented to him so far, and then he concludes that nothing he's examined will change his mind in relation to the Paul Coffey decision, or the Paul Coffey final report. But in relation to that, would it be possible, therefore, for the Minister to meet the Residents and Victims Committee and to explain to them and show them why he believes the new evidence is not sufficient, and also to explain why he thinks the conclusions of Keane and of Coffey are valid. As you know, last week, Minister, Ms Antoinette Keegan, the leading personality in the Stardust Relatives and Victims Committee, she did a 24-hour occupation of the Taoiseach's security area over at the Taoiseach's department, and that was on foot of what I understand was a commitment by Taoiseach Kenny during the 2011 contest, 2011 general election, when he was in Coolock. He made a commitment, I understand, to the people of Artane and Coolock when he was on the, I think, on Deputy Flanagan's campaign, that he would, in fact, call or put in train a commission investigation, and that he felt already, what he'd heard at that stage, and maybe listened to myself and other deputies over the years in this House, that he felt a commission investigation was necessary. So is that something that you could follow up on in relation to that, and that the Taoiseach also would meet? And indeed, the Taoiseach told me last Thursday morning that he also, if a request for a meeting went to him, that he also would be prepared to meet the committee, and that could also take place. Just a key point in your response, Minister, obviously, where you say, and I quote, "Unwarranted significance has been attributed to changes between the draft report and the final report." But I think a change which omitted the Senior Counsel Coffey calling for a commission investigation is a very profound change, and I think you know, it's understandable that the Relatives and Victims Committee and their advisors have given very strong attention to that draft report. And one final point, Cathaoirleach, obviously, is we've seen a number of investigations now, Minister, in relation to, under the MacDougall legislation of 2004, the Dean Lyons case, for example, another constituent of my own who died tragically, the Gary Douch case, and these commissions, I think they were very short, sharp, effective, and not very costly to the state. And in terms of cost, I think again commission investigation is the right way to go. So I thank the Minister for her attention to this matter, and to ask her if she can ask Minister Shatter to do as requested by the committee. Thanks, Cathaoirleach.
Thank you, Deputy Darling. Deputy
I'll
Minister.
be very brief, Chair. I have no difficulty in bringing that request to the Minister, and again, Deputy, I think anything that can bring a degree of comfort to these families, you know, we will look at, and I would also convey to him the fact that the Taoiseach and the Taoiseach have indicated that they would be quite prepared if both an invitation and it was acceded to came in. So I will convey that, Deputy, and I will do my best.
Thank you, Minister. The next topical issue selected is from